Let us build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live. A place where saints and children tell how hearts learn to forgive. Built of hopes and dreams and visions, rock of faith and vault of grace. Here the love of Christ shall end divisions. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place.
Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in San Carlos, California, celebrates its 50th anniversary in 1997. Located on the San Francisco Peninsula, it is in many ways a typical suburban church. But Holy Trinity has a resource few churches have. All 4 pastors who have been called to the congregation are still alive. 3 will be participating in some way during the church's year of celebration. However, Pastor Emmett Beilstein, who founded the church 50 years ago, is unable to participate personally. So members of Holy Trinity gathered at Sunnyview Lutheran Home to allow Pastor Beilstein, his wife Alice, and the last charter member of the congregation, Helen Barg, to talk about the founding of Holy Trinity using something that didn't even exist in 1947, videotape.
My name is Helen Barg from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, and I'd like to introduce Pastor Emmett Beilstein and his beloved wife Alice. Emmett was our first pastor 50 years ago. He founded the church by going door to door, knocking on doors. And we're going to reminisce with he and Alice a little bit today about how the church started and what their feelings were at the time and how the church progressed, and about the congregation that started with Pastor Beilstein. Emmett, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background? Where were you born?
I was born in a little oil town in Pennsylvania. It doesn't exist any longer. But then when I was 18 years old, we moved to Butler, Pennsylvania, and about 30,000 population. And that was in 1918, when the terrible flu was decimating the people. And we moved there, and then I had 1 month that they had no school because too much flu. That saved me. I was so homesick for the country. So then I finished school, and then I went to Capital University to start my college career.
Can I interrupt? Is it true that you were born 96 years ago? Because you look wonderful and your mind is so sharp that you...
It'll be 96 years on the 28th of May.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we'd like to know where you were before you came to Holy Trinity. Where were you? You were in the Army, were you?
I had 16 years in Port Angeles, my first call. After 16 years, I went into the service in 1942. And I was in the service for 4 years.
As a chaplain?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Did you remember that you're named after the church in Port Angeles?
No, we should tell them that. Holy Trinity, huh?
Holy Trinity, my first church.
That was your choice, that we call it Holy Trinity. Yeah. And it was a good choice.
And they accepted that.
Oh yes, it was a good choice.
Mm-hmm. The call I got from Los Angeles, there were 2 calls, one from a little church in Michigan, and one from Los Angeles to start a mission in San Carlos. I chose San Carlos. I'm not so sure.
Yes, it was. It was.
When I first came there, I discovered that another pastor had put down a payment for property on the White Oaks area. And the people made such a fuss because on Sunday morning they didn't want a church. And so finally they had to turn the the property back. They had borrowed the money from a church in Sacramento, and the people that they were dealing with were not honest, and they ran away.
They
with
weren't
it.
Lutherans, probably.
Well, I don't know about that, but they ran away with the first payment. So, and we also, with that same money, they had bought a little property on Cedar Street, large enough to build a parsonage. They still had that property, and they asked me then to sell that property, and I did. A man from the city wanted it so badly, and he paid a good price, and we made up the money that they lost so that they paid the money back to the church in Sacramento.
What was San Carlos like in those days? Do you remember?
Very small.
Mm-hmm.
One little restaurant down in El Camino where I could get my meals, and no apartments available. It was very, very small.
It was what they called in those days a bedroom town, where all the men commuted to the city or outside of San Carlos,
That's
and all the women stayed home and took care of the children. It was a little town of less than 5,000 people.
I think so.
Mm-hmm. I remember when you came to my house, Fred, to see Fred and I, and we invited you in, and Fred said, "Oh, that would be wonderful to have a Lutheran church because I'm a Lutheran." He said, "I'm Missouri Synod Lutheran." And then you turned to me and you said to me, "What about you?" And I said, "I'm an Episcopalian." And you said, "Oh, you'd be happier being a Lutheran." And you didn't have an automobile, did you?
No. And then I walked all over San Carlos,
Yes.
to Redwood City, and when we had our first service on Mother's Day,
May 10th, 1947.
then we had a very small congregation, very small.
We met, I think, on Laurel Street in the old Laurel Hall, which was above a bar.
Yeah.
And in the morning while we were having our service, they would throw out all the liquor and beer bottles and sort of drown out our very, very tiny choir of I think, 2 or 3 people. And it was a very different place to start a church, but it was all we could afford at that time.
The fire department was just across the street
Yes.
from the bar. And many vacant lots in San Carlos with a lot of high grass.
A lot of fires.
And always about the time I start to preach, there'd be a call for the fire department.
In those days, they had a volunteer fire department, and so there were 3 large horn-like sounds that would call the volunteers from their homes to come down to the fire department and get on the fire engine and ride to the fire. Now, tell us how you started. How many of us were there at the first church?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 25.
At the most, I think.
But
yeah.
some of those people were from the congregation in Burlingame. They helped to swell the congregation.
Came to visit us.
Then we rented a little apartment where they were making a whole bunch of new homes on the hill there.
But first you were on Holly Street, you were in a boarding house.
Oh, that's
weren't
right.
you? Yes. And then you sent for Alice. You went back and married Alice in
November,
October. Of the same year.
Yes. And I not only got Alice, but I got a Nash too.
You got her. Alice always said that Pastor Beilstein married her for her automobile, which isn't true, Alice, of course. It was a love match.
We have a little while to prove that.
She was a wonderful help.
She was a wonderful pastor's wife.
She burned her hat once.
She was a good friend, and when we were having a celebration at the church, right early on in the church's history, I believe we had a birthday cake for Alice, and she bent over to blow out the candles. And in those days, we all wore hats with veils and gloves and the whole bit. And Alice's veil caught on fire. Whoosh! it went, and we had to snatch it off her head and jump on it. Alice's new hat. We all jumped on Alice's new hat. You were a good sport, Alice. We didn't even have enough money to buy you a new hat at the time.
The next Sunday, she wore the same hat with the veil all
with a new veil.
Well, you could wear a hat without a veil.
Yes, you could. Alice, can I ask you how it felt to be the pastor's wife of Holy Trinity, the first pastor's wife? How was it? Was it hard, Alice?
The pastor's first wife.
Now, wait, that's
I phrased that a little bit backwards. Throw Mama down the stairs her hat.
Well, I just walked in and accepted things as they were and didn't make too much fuss about it.
You were wonderful. You were a really good pastor's wife.
She made
Alice.
lots of cookies for the children.
Yeah, she baked a lot, and you were such a good cook.
Alice came from a family filled with pastors, a grandfather, father, brothers, and nephews.
I have two brothers that were pastors. They're dead now.
One of Alice's brothers was head editor of the Lutheran Standard.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Pastor Schramm.
And the other was a missionary in India. And eventually he was the president of the seminary in India.
Alice, would you mind if I asked you how old you are?
I'm 92.
Wonderful, wonderful. You married a much younger woman, Pastor. But you both look great.
Well, why don't you ask him how old he is?
I did. I did ask him. You both look great. You both look wonderful.
In the early days, the congregation had to improvise.
And you had the first adult confirmation class at Mama Hunkin's house?
Yes, you and Mr. Mormon, Rosemary Mendez.
Virginia Duval.
Yes, and Dan Mendez.
Yeah, we met around Mama Hunkin's dining room table with you.
Yeah.
And learned how to become good Lutherans.
That's right. Some few families were so very dedicated that they helped so much, like you and Fred and the people from Redwood City. Mrs. Helfrich and her husband, he never joined the church, but he came to services all the time.
The church met for months above Laurel Hall, but the time came to find a more permanent site.
Now, Pastor, after we got started, and then how did you decide where our church would be located?
Property was expensive and very scarce.
Yes.
But there was a very lovely plot of ground big enough for a parsonage and a church. And over right across from the park. Oh, where was that?
On Britain.
On Britain, yes. And I went over, but they wanted so much we couldn't afford it.
No.
But the Episcopalians bought it.
Ah.
And now they have a church there.
Yes, and they're having their anniversary this year also.
Yes.
Yes.
The wife of the pastor and another woman came, and they said, could we share the hall, the beer parlor, with you folks? So we said yes. And they'd come early, and then we came for Sunday school and church, and when we'd leave, they'd be coming up the stairs for another service.
Now, how did we decide on Cedar and Manzanita for our lots? Do you remember? And how much did we pay for them?
We tried to find lots elsewhere and couldn't find them. So finally, that was vacant, and the woman who owned it, I never met her, I never saw her, but she wanted to sell, and we bought it from her. Then we built a parsonage and a
parish hall. Do you remember how much we paid? Do you recall?
I think we had $25,000.
I don't think we paid that much for them, did we? For the lots?
No, no.
For that whole corner?
But we had to build the buildings and everything with it.
So we had...
Well, Alice's father loaned us $5,000 more.
Pastor Schramm.
Yes. So we had another 5,000. And Harry Peterson's son and a contractor, retired man from Redwood City, I think his name is Johansson, I'm not sure.
Yes.
They built the parsonage and the parish hall. And then it took some years before we could build a church.
Now, the whole membership of the church at that time, which was very small,
Yes.
probably less than 25, was on the building committee and the grounds committee, and made big decisions.
I think every man that we had in those days, women didn't.
No, there were
they
no
didn't-
women on the council or the building committee at that time.
Yes.
In fact, I think the church had just decided to let women take communion with.
Oh no.
No.
They could take communion, but they couldn't serve on the church councils.
Right. Right.
As far as I remember.
And how did we pay your salary, or did?
Well, I think that
and the gas and electric and all the things that had to be paid.
that came from the headquarters until the church was able to take over altogether. For a while there, they would increase a little bit here and a little bit there, and then eventually we never lagged in paying back our loan from the church.
No.
We never had anything left over,
No.
but we always met our obligation. Yeah.
Yeah. That. How did you? What were your feelings when we started the church? When we had our first meeting in our new church. Do you recall what your feelings were?
Well, I was very happy, and I guess somewhat proud.
You had a right to be proud. You worked so hard to get the church started.
We put a lot of effort into the work of the church.
And as I recall, you used to turn back a lot of your salary too. You'd say, "Oh, here, we'll pay the Alice and I will pay the PG&E bill for the church, or the telephone bill," and a lot of your money went
I hope
back.
that I told her.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
And then, how long did you stay, Pastor?
I was there 19 years.
Yes.
19 years. I had a couple of calls, one up to Oregon, one down to Southern California, but I didn't accept either one of them.
Were you happy at Trinity, Holy Trinity?
Oh, I think most of the time.
Church brought great joy to us, Pastor, and we were right across the street.
Yeah.
And I guess our two sons didn't always bring you joy because they were dirt clod throwers, and I think every once in a while one would land on your roof because you were right across the street from where we lived.
I think many times when I was pretty low, I'd come over to your house and I'd get some help.
we loved you, and you were a dear friend in those days, and you still are.
To his successors and to the congregation, Pastor Beilstein had this to say, with a special aside to Tom Krogstad, husband of Pastor Kim Eifert Krogstad. Tom was present at the taping.
I wish them all well, and I know they've been very fortunate to have good pastors. And
Yes.
I think the pastor they have now, you can tell your wife, we think she's very fine, and we're very happy.
Yes, she is. She's very fine.
She's able to do so many things that I wouldn't have ever been able to do. I think you all know we love the church,
Yes.
and we know you're under good hands.
Yes.
We're very thankful for that.
Yes. Yeah. We're doing really well.
Yeah. I think it's just amazing how they find these young families.
Oh yes, it is. We wondered where are these young couples coming from? But you know, in San Carlos, for a while we were a town of of senior citizens and older people. Then all of a sudden it seemed to turn around and we became a town of young people again.
Is that so?
Yes, young people again. And now we have just loads of young children and young people in our town, which is great.
I couldn't believe that would ever happen.
I know, I couldn't either, but it did. Things just sort of go full circle. Because when you started the church, we were all young couples starting with little children, not very much money, but just struggling along. But we were all happy. The mamas got to stay home with the children, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
What amazes me is how the women in the former church stick together.
Now, is there anything about our celebration that you would like to suggest we do? Or?
I hope that you have a very happy celebration, and when you look back, and you must also accept the difficult times that we had too, as well as the good times. But as you look ahead to the future, I know that the next 50 years will be wonderful years for the congregation.
Do you think you and I and Alice will be here too?
Oh, I'm quite sure I won't be.
In spirit, we will. I think our church was very blessed to have you as our first pastor. Have you and Alice, and we'll always remember you in our prayers.
Well, thank you.
I love you both dearly.
Thank you very much.